The Spin-off Podcast Network. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Nau mai hoki mai kia The Fold e mihi ne, ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. This is a special one, I think. At least for me, I'm a magazine person. I've edited magazines, read them basically as long as I could read. And one of maybe my very favorite magazine in the world in some respects is Bloomberg Businessweek, which is, Businessweek is a publication that's been around for a long time, probably nearly a century, and I don't think it's particularly well known here. I think it's in some way similar in format to The Economist, a weekly business publication, but it's just a magic publication. It's got incredible design, incredible story ideation. It's got a real sense of flair and tone, and knows exactly what it is, and it just, as a whole product, is just beautifully made. And so I've subscribed to it for probably 8 or 9 years. And I remember reading a story a couple of years ago, it would have been almost exactly 2 years ago, about nasopharyngeal swabs and a drama between the cousins who owned the only factory which made them in the US. And reading it and then going, man, this is great. And looking at the byline, because that's what journalists do. And it was Olivia Carville. And I was like, that name's familiar. And then realizing it was the same Olivia Carville who'd been part of the Herald's investigative team and a really key reporter for Stuff and the Christchurch Press before that. And I was like, how has this happened? And then sort of basically caught up on her career and had wanted to basically speak to Olivia about this story and about Businessweek, which is a publication I massively geek out over for quite a while. And as luck would have it, she has taken advantage of the loosening of our pandemic travel restrictions to come home from New York to visit whānau down here, and was kind enough to take a break from her holiday to come on The Fold. And honestly, it's kind of a masterclass in journalism, I think, what she delivers to us here, in both the sort of stickability and the doggedness, not just with the story that there is that, but also the willingness to say, I'm going to have to basically go back to zero and learn again. And she's done that at least, I think, sort of 3 times in her career. And even though she's only been working for probably 10 years, the fact that she was willing to do this, to admit that there was more to learn, ultimately is what's gotten her to a place where she is now a reporter for Businessweek and has written cover stories for this, publication, which is one of, if not the best business publication in the world. That's just an extraordinary thing for anyone to done, let alone a reporter from the wrong side of the world in their early 30s. So we talk about the process of doing that. We talk about her career, which began at the Press 3 months before the Christchurch earthquakes, and that became her introduction to journalism, which a lot of people, quite understandably, the tragic weight of that, both personally and professionally, would have been enough to kind of push you out of the career. It didn't, and I think we're all the richer for that. We talk about her time in Canada, her time at the Herald, and that amazing investigations team that was there for a while, and is still in some respects through the mid 2000s or 2010, sorry, and then about her road to Businessweek and what it's like working for Bloomberg, which is just this very strange, enormous kind of media organization come technology company hybrid. It's really, really fun. She's super articulate and passionate, and the lessons this contains for writers and reporters about how to get better and stay with a story and the value of editing. It's just a whole lot. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. This is Olivia Carville from Bloomberg Businessweek on The Fold. Kia ora, Olivia, and welcome to The Fold.
Kia ora, thanks so much for having me.
As we were just saying off air, I'm so excited to have you on because of your career in CV, which I think is really interesting in itself, but also you are a window into Bloomberg, an organisation I'm fascinated with, but Businessweek, which I think isn't particularly well known as a magazine in New Zealand, but it is also, I think, one of the very best magazines in the world in so many different ways. And I want to get into that. But I was wondering if you could start by just telling me how feature writing got its hooks into you.
I've always been interested in narrative and through journalism trying to find people's stories. I think any reporter you ask, why did you get into this job? It's about the people that we write about and trying to bring them to life in a way. And I think that feature writing gives us the opportunity to do that, to explain what a person looks like, how they're acting, to try and bring them to life on the page. And I think breaking news stories, we don't have the luxury of, time and word length to get into that kind of detail. But certainly for me as a reader, it's fiction and reading about characters in books, which is why I fell in love with writing. So I feel like all of that background kind of led me into feature writing.
And you can really feel that in those those sort of Businessweek stories that you've written over the past couple of years, that sense of character. But you're from Christchurch.
That's right.
And you were working at the press during the earthquakes. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I actually started 3 months before the 2011 earthquake. It was quite the introduction to journalism.
So how did that, because that is probably one of the signal events of our lifetimes in terms of as a complex, tragic reporting assignment. What was it like being at the press through that period, and how did you sort of report on it? How did it inform the way your career developed?
I didn't really expect as a junior reporter to be faced with that kind of tragedy and that kind of event right out the door. It was awful. Speak to anyone on the ground that day. It was a really tough day for not just reporters, anyone in Christchurch. And at the press, part of our building collapsed. We lost a colleague in there, and we were sent out into the streets to try and cover a disaster as it was unfolding. We were on the ground before emergency services were. And I think that I really struggled looking back now. I really struggled with that line between being a journalist and bearing witness to a disaster and putting down my notepad and pen and trying to help people who were in the rubble or trying to help people who were lost or freaking out. And I still, looking back, actually now I didn't think we were going to get into this topic, and just talking about it, it's emotional, it's tough. I found a close family friend that day who was seriously injured, and that's when I put down my notepad and pen to help her. But prior to that, if I didn't know them, I just kept walking, which is a pretty confronting thing to face as a 23-year-old junior reporter. So I was at the press for about 5 years, and every story was touched by the earthquake. I can't tell you the number of times I wrote earthquake ravaged in a sentence. Everything I did was, how's the mental health of Cantabrians? How is the city in the aftermath of the earthquake? Every year on the anniversary, I'd be writing about a family member who lost a loved one in that disaster. And it just takes a toll on you. How do you leave that kind of content in the computer screen and walk away? And I didn't know how. I was afraid that my career was going to be guided by this disaster that broke my hometown. And I thought that I didn't have an identity as a journalist beyond that. I was afraid that that's who I was and that's all I was going to be. And I think that when I moved overseas for the first time, I think I was running away from that. I wanted to try and prove that I could be a reporter without a natural disaster to springboard off, that I knew how to do the job without having that attachment or that topic to write about.
It's unimaginable, and I feel like, it was something that affected the country, but unless we were there, we just, the rest of us reporters, we have a level of detachment from it. Sure, I think that there's a thing happening right now with the pandemic that has some of those qualities, and you can feel that there's a sort of, when is it okay to sort of step away? How do I be something else as well as this? So did you go overseas and then came back to the Herald? Is that?
Yeah, and you also asked a question before that I didn't answer. You asked what was it like to be part of the press newsroom through that disaster, and I did just want to say, never before have I been in a newsroom where your colleagues kind of become your family in a way. I know that sounds super cliche and lame, but that day brought us together in really weird ways, and people who have left not only the press but left journalism altogether will still reach out to me on the 22nd of February and just say, hey, remember how crazy that day was? What's happening? Hope you're okay. And it's so nice to hear from people years later who were, we were together in the madness and the chaos on that day, and we still remember years on. I do recall one moment when Andrew Holden, who was editor of the press at the time, came up to me when we finally found a space to write in and got laptops working and had the ability to communicate with one another. And it was a really emotional moment where he was this head of the newsroom, the chief, the editor, who I was afraid of and I'd never talked to before. He just came over and hugged me. And I think there was a moment of humanity between colleagues that was just pretty touching and something that I'll always remember. And so I was really scared to leave the press. I was reluctant to leave the newspaper that I had so much pride to write for and that I thought handled that disaster in a really incredible way. We did get a newspaper out to Cantabrians the next day. Looking back, holy crap, how did we do that?
Just even staying and working in a situation when you had every right to just try and survive
everything and run
yourselves.
Yeah, for sure. So I look back with such fondness and love for that newspaper and my time there. But I needed to, as I said, escape the city and escape the identity I'd created in a way around that topic and around that disaster. And so I went to Canada, and I didn't have a job, and I applied for all of these positions to try and get into the Vancouver Sun and various newspapers over there, and was just rejected time and time again. And then the Toronto Star had an internship opportunity come up. So I applied for that, and they'd never hired an international before, never hired a foreigner, and so I was the first one. And initially I really sucked. And the editor pulled me aside and said, of our crop of interns this year, Olivia, you are at the bottom, so you need to change something about how you're pitching, what you're doing, because it's not quite working for us.
Why did you suck, given you had five I mean, A, given where you are, but B, given that you had 5 years of really quite complex reporting under your belt by that stage? To go back to intern, you'd think you'd have, talk us through what wasn't working and how you resolved that.
I think that in the wake of a disaster, there are stories everywhere. They are not hard to find, and they land on your lap. So I didn't have to do a lot of idea generation. I was also writing about the same topic over and over again. When I moved to Canada, I had no idea how their systems worked, how the government worked, how to make a phone call. I didn't know how to use the white pages, really basic stuff that you really have to know. And I was learning, I was on this steady ramp of trying to learn everything while also trying to pitch and trying to land stories that were quite tough. I remember they sent me to one of the hospitals when, do you remember the crack cocaine smoking mayor, Rob Ford? Yeah. So he was in hospital at the time with cancer, and they sent me there, and it was my first day, and I had to wait outside the hospital and just ambush his brother, Doug, who later became mayor.
As well,
and try and get a comment from him. And there was just this horde of journalists sprinting after him down the street. They were running up the car park in the hospital, up the spiral stairs. Cameramen were getting pushed to the ground. People were fighting. And I was like, I don't know if I'm made out for this. This is insane. So I think it was just a reality check and also a culture shock. But that comment did kind of kick me up the arse a bit and made me realise I'm either in it or I'm not. I called my mother the day that the editor pulled me aside and told me that I really needed to sharpen up. And I cried and said, I'm not good enough. These journalists are so much better than me. I need to come home. And she said to me, give it 3 months, and if you still feel the same way, I'll pay for your ticket home, because I couldn't afford one at that time.
That's good, Mum.
That's good advice. And so I gave it 3 months, and I thought I'd give it my all, and I landed, I think, 7 A1 stories in that 3-month period. So
pretty good.
Yeah, I felt pretty good at the end of that, but it was tough. And then I really enjoyed my time at the Toronto Star as well. The internship was great. You jump around a lot of different teams and different beats, learning about the newsroom. And then I joined their investigative team, which had always been a goal for me. And just as I'd gotten settled in the job that I wanted and was happy, I got deported. My visa got rejected and I got kicked back to New Zealand.
Like deported? Like,
well, I say deported, it might be too strong a word, but I think December 23rd, the lawyer who was handling my visa called me and said, it's been rejected, unfortunately. You have to return to your country as soon as possible, and you can't even go back to the newsroom and clear your desk. You're not allowed on site. So,
wow.
That was not great. And I got sent back home. And luckily, the New Zealand Herald were just building out an investigative team. So it was perfect timing. And I was able to step into that newsroom in that role.
Because that investigative team, which on some level felt like it was made, broken down, unmade, like there was a lot of change. But I feel like that period that you were there was it was an amazing group of people, and it had sufficient scale. They were all in the newsroom. Now some of them are still there, but they're Fisher's up north, Jared Savage's in Tauranga, and it doesn't have that sort of sense of momentum that it potentially had at the time. Do you want to talk about that period of your career and how you you all worked together through that?
Yeah, it was awesome to have the opportunity to help build out an investigative team at the Herald and to work with some of the best journalists in the country. I formed really close friendships with the individuals on that team, people who I'm still in touch with today, and they all did some amazing stories over that time. I think that we were wanting to foster a sense of investigative journalism in New Zealand and really concentrate reporters in that area of journalism. And I think that they managed to achieve that and accomplish it. It was a great team. It was led by, really good editors, and it kind of felt like, looking back, kind of the glory days, having us all together, working together, going to our weekly meetings, and we'd just throw around ideas, chat about different things that we have coming up and try and feel the vibe as to whether people are interested in these topics or not. And it was, Chris Reid was leading the team for a long time. He was a really great editor, and there was just a lot of support and, again, that sense of camaraderie, I guess, around not a disaster this time, but, a love and passion for investigative reporting.
So from there, you go to Columbia and you did your master's, and I was is it correct that there was like finance accounting, corporate finance, operations, like some stuff which, like I run a media business and I look at that and I go, oh no, not for me. Thanks. Probably to everyone who's detriment. I apologize to our people who are listening right now. But that's a big, you were walking willingly into a place that, a lot of journalists, even business journalists, some of those elements, they're for someone who loves character and so on, they can feel like that's a bit abstracted from it. What attracted you to business journalism and that getting into the teeth of those pieces?
Yeah, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't tell Columbia in my application that I had failed math in high school. It was really hard. I did not have an interest in business journalism before I applied. I did want to go to Columbia. I thought it would be an incredible opportunity, and I did speak to their career team and told them that I'd find it very difficult to attend Columbia and pay the insane college fees in the US, and that I needed scholarship support. And they suggested to me, or maybe nudged, I should say, towards the business track, because that's where the biggest scholarship fund is.
Right.
So it was scary for me to apply for a business and finance position at Columbia, but when I started really thinking about it, I did come to realize that that is a massive weakness in my resume. I had no idea how to follow the money. I didn't know how to write about issues through a financial lens. I didn't know how to read company financial reports or business statements. I couldn't cover an earnings release. And I think that it taught me so much more than what the other tracks would have. There was a health and science track and a foreign correspondent kind of political track, an arts and culture track. I would have felt a lot more comfortable in all of the others. I think business would have been the one that I felt like a fish out of water, and I really was when I started there. But I think that that's good as well, because it meant that I was really going to learn. I wasn't just going to try and just get Columbia on my CV and move on from there. I was going to actually be sitting in the library every weekend for 10 months trying to understand financial accounting. And I still don't know if I really figured it out. Corporate finance was the hardest class I've ever been in. That exam was horrifying. It was like 9 hours. And just, I don't know how I passed, but I did.
So
great result.
Congratulations. Just the idea of a 9-hour exam is making me want to run from the room. What was your path to Bloomberg? Was it straight out of school, or, and why that organization?
I think that when you apply to a school like Columbia, you have this idea in your mind of what it's going to be like when you graduate and walk out, and that all of these big media publications are going to be opening their arms and welcoming you in, and that is not the reality. I've talked to quite a number of students who have considered going to the school since and explained to them that both the pros and the cons about it. I think that when you come into a program like that as a mid-career journalist, it's quite tough. You're rolling the dice. And when I graduated, I did have, 8 years experience in Canada and New Zealand, and I felt like I could walk into a US newsroom and know what I was doing after studying at Columbia, but I didn't have any American clips. I'd only written for Canadian and New Zealand publications, and you're just not competitive over there. The number of people who apply for open jobs is like hundreds. So your application is not going to get noticed or picked up if you don't come from one of the bigger outlets. If you're applying from a New Zealand outlet, which they're not familiar with, it's very hard to get recognized. So I decided very early on when I was at Columbia that I was going to apply for internships to get a foot in the door at some of these big publications. And what I decided is that Bloomberg was the place I wanted to go for a few reasons. One is that they're really supportive with foreign workers. They are great when it comes to visa sponsorship. Not many outlets are. So Bloomberg has helped me get 2 visas since I've been there, and they're also helping me to get on the track to get a green card. And they're great from that respect. But more so than that, they help you learn how to understand actual business reporting, because I'm sure you've heard before, being in a classroom doesn't really teach you the ropes of actual journalism. I think there are a lot of reporters out there who didn't even study, have just walked into the job. And so for me, I did learn the nuts and bolts of financial reporting. I learned what a business statement was. I learned how to cover an earnings report. But in terms of actually dealing with the PR pushback, dealing with these companies, pitching stories, coming up with ideas, being in the daily grind of business journalism, you can't really teach that. And Bloomberg is the best place to go if that's what you want to learn. They have beat reporters. They have teams that cover everything from muni bonds to hedge funds to billionaires to the markets. So I wanted to immerse myself in business journalism, and Bloomberg was just the best outlet. So I did apply for their internship, and I walked out of Columbia into an internship program with a lot of American students, now working journalists, who were in their early 20s and had never been in a newsroom before. So I did have to eat a pretty big humble pie, but it was worth it in the end.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spinoff. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
One thing, this is massive, this whole podcast is super self-indulgent, but this is up there. So there's a book that I'd wanted to read for a long time that isn't really available anymore, but my wife actually tracked down a second-hand copy for me, and it's called The Bloomberg Way, which was like the geekiest thing ever. Have you read it? And like, to what extent, like, because basically what it does is kind of codify everything down to the most minute detail that is done in Bloomberg, from the sort of the terminal side business to Businessweek. And I found it so geekily fascinating. Yeah, like is it a sort of a prereq going in? And to what extent does it accurately reflect just how kind of precise and controlled the organisation is in terms of what it creates?
I can't believe you've read that. That is super geeky, but I love it. I have also read it. I have a couple of copies at home, maybe struggled through it. It is very, focused on the style, the Bloomberg style, which is quite unique, and also the terminal as well. Yeah, I think we refer to it quite a lot in the newsroom, just because Bloomberg has different ways of going about things than maybe some other outlets. We are heavily focused in finance and business, and we do run a business, which is, the terminal. So people pay for that content. Do
you want to explain what the terminal is? Because I feel like it's like almost like the original SaaS product. It's such an interesting, almost unique business, and almost no one knows about, like a $24,000 a year subscription computer thing that's been going for decades.
Right. So Bloomberg is really a financial data services company. The terminal is this weird, old school looking kind of black box on your computer that pops up, and then you need to use a fingerprint swiped sensor to gain access to it. And it's got a black background, and the text is an orangey color, which is quite weird when you first start working there. And you can pretty much gain access to financial data for, any public company in the world. It shows you what's happening in the markets. You can pull data and analytics on everything from, lawsuits related to companies to the movement of oil, shipping news. That brings up all company press releases. It also brings up all articles that have been written about that company by outside outlets. It brings up their earnings results. You can see how much money they've made going back, years, if not decades. You can see what their share price has been doing. It's an incredible tool for anyone in finance.
But also, if you're a journalist, I assume you also have access to it, and that's kind of a huge unlock versus the average kind of workaday business reporter at another publication.
Yeah, that's right. It's a great resource for journalists, and there's just a world of data there that we can use. I've talked to a few people who say when they walk into an apartment in New York City, where a lot of people have obviously been working from home, and they see a terminal sitting there open, it's a bit of a power move. If you've got your own terminal login, you're doing pretty well.
Love that. So I first got introduced to Bloomberg through Businessweek, which was a publication that it just acquired that's been around for a long, long time. But it really gave this a quite extraordinary makeover to the design is, I think, the best in magazines. Won heaps of awards for it. It has this super modern, slightly chaotic vision, but also has this real prescribed format in terms of it's got the short stories, it's got 3 features in its feature well, and then that sort of pursuitsy, bougie, increasingly bougie section out the back. It's a fantastic magazine, and you have gone from intern to, I think probably the most prestige part of the Bloomberg writing universe real fast. Tell me how that happened and how, what your relationship to Businessweek was and is now.
I love how much knowledge you have about Businessweek.
I'm such a geek.
It is a great magazine. When I started at Bloomberg, it was my goal to write for the magazine, and I didn't really think it was going to happen. I was told when I first applied for the internship that it would take 10 years to get on Bloomberg's investigative team and be able to write long-form features, and I was gearing up and prepared for that. I think that it really, for me, came down to luck, to be honest. I joined the technology team as a beat reporter covering short-term rental companies and covering, Airbnb and Expedia, and was just learning the ropes of business reporting. But I always gravitate towards character-driven stories. If I'm going to write about a business, I want to write about it from the sense of, tension. Who are the people inside that business? Who are the everyday users or consumers who are being impacted? Which is a different style of business reporting than just the traditional company beat of writing about what's going on inside the company, how their finances are going, what are their acquisition targets, what's the CEO saying, that kind of stuff. I think there is such a compelling side to business reporting that Businessweek does an amazing job at really getting inside these companies and understanding the strategy and the people behind them and connecting readers with companies in a way that we don't see in other outlets. So I had a goal of, I was hoping that I'd be able to write for the magazine. I pitched them a couple of times, which, didn't work out in those early days, but I just kept at it as a beat reporter. And through the pandemic, I found the first ever Businessweek story I wrote about was technology related. It was how K-pop stans, which if anyone doesn't know what that is, because I didn't when I started writing about it, these are Korean pop fans, crazy Korean pop fans who are obsessed with the bands and just have huge passion for them, have the way in which they were impacting US politics. I don't know if you remember, but there was that
Donald Trump Stadium,
the Trump rally,
beautiful.
and the K-pop fans on TikTok telling everyone to buy tickets and not go. And so I wrote a little bit about how the K-pop stans was impacting US politics, and that was
like a Taylor Loren story.
Yeah, I guess it is. And that was a really interesting insight. And so after I got a little bit of a taste of what it's like to write for the magazine, I kept pitching them and wanting to try and, write for them, work with their editors. So then I pitched this other really bizarre topic, which is offbeat from what I was doing, about the swab factory.
That was, I think, the first story of yours I read for Businessweek. That was such a yarn. So tell us about that, because I feel like that is a classic Businessweek story, off your beat, but it has all of that. It's got family and money and the tension of the moment and bizarre characters. So good.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, that was a really odd story. I actually had escaped New York City in the peak of the pandemic and went up to a little town in Maine. It's called Millinocket. It's close to the Canadian border, and that's where my boyfriend's parents live. So we were trying to get away from the craziness of New York City and went up there. And near Millinocket is this little town called Guilford. And Guilford was producing the only swab that we could use globally to test for the coronavirus at that time. They made the nasopharyngeal swab. I don't think it was used that much in New Zealand, but it was?
It was?
It was?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, because my mum and Nana had never had it before. But This is the brain tickler.
That was our only thing until very recently. Like the rat tests were illegal. So no, we've had our share of their products.
Your share of nasopharyngeal swabs. Yeah, they are not ideal. So this is for those who have been lucky enough to not have had a nasopharyngeal swab done. It's the 6-inch swab that goes all the way up your nose to the back of your throat, to the area between your ears that's close to your brain, to take samples, and that's what they'd test for, because the coronavirus would linger in the nasopharynx. And there was this factory in Guildford, Maine, of all places, that was the only producer of nasopharyngeal swabs in the entire country. And so I was up in Maine and I was looking into this company and what are they doing and how's it going, just because I was in the area. And then I found this lawsuit between the two cousins who owned it. They were suing one another to try and essentially divide the company because they had huge disagreements over the future of it and, where it wanted to go. And one had actually filed a lawsuit to dissolve ownership of the company, saying that they were at such a toxic point in their, in the company's history that they hadn't spoken to one another for like 3 years. And it blew my mind that the only producer of the one swab that we need to test against COVID is at an absolute crisis point when the government is just funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into them. So, I wrote about that for Businessweek. And as you said, Businessweek loves stories about characters, about tension inside companies and creative ways to write about business. And so they were really eager for that one.
And so subsequent to that, you've really made Airbnb a beat. Like I think the first... was that a cover story?
Airbnb was a cover story.
Yeah, and it was about this kind of team that comes in to clean up literal and figurative messes for the company, kind of black ops. And since then, you've really sort of owned that. How did, and obviously you were in that space to begin with, but you sort of leapt up to the big kind of sweeping stories that really the companies don't want to be told. I'm assuming that you had some quite hectic correspondence around that. Tell us about that story and how you've come to kind of... Because Airbnb is a fascinating company, and of all of the big tech companies, it's almost got, in some respects, the cleanest reputation. Brian Chesky, the CEO, has got this quite amazing reputation. They know how to sort of... And I don't think it's done cynically, but the way that they encourage people to rent places in Ukraine at the start of the invasion and so on, and they've done similar things from time to time. And you've revealed other sides to Airbnb, which are a lot more kind of fraught and complex. Tell us about that story and how you've come to kind of conceive of that company and make it your own.
Yeah, sure. So I was a beat reporter when I first heard about, this particular issue inside Airbnb, and I wanted to look into it. I wanted to take some time to understand what the company does in response to violent crimes that occur at its listings. But as a beat reporter, you're pretty busy. You don't have time to just sit down and call 100 people to try and ask questions about this one particular aspect of the company. I'm covering earnings, I'm covering company announcements, I'm going to conferences, I'm busy with all the other companies that I write about. So when Bloomberg offered an investigative fellowship opportunity, I applied, and they asked for pitches from beat reporters all over the newsroom. It's a global newsroom, so Bloomberg has bureaus in almost every country in the world. So they got a lot of applications in, and I pitched looking at Airbnb through that lens, trying to understand what happens inside the company when things go wrong during a stay. And I think that they were interested in that pitch for a few reasons. As you say, Airbnb is so popular today. It's become a verb. You don't just go and stay at a short-term rental property, you go and stay at an Airbnb. Everyone knows what Airbnb is. Mostly everyone has used the product. And no one really hears about the dark side of it or these safety issues that they come up with. You may have family, friends, or people who have been conned, who have turned up to a listing and it hasn't been there. The address doesn't exist, or they've asked for a refund because the place was dirty and they never got one, or pretty minor details like that around stays going wrong. But when it comes to the violent crime, they had a really slick team inside the company that was cleaning all this stuff up. And they were doing that to both protect the individual in the middle of the crisis or the safety incident, but also to protect and defend the company's reputation. From a PR standpoint, these are hugely damaging incidents. We're talking about murder, we're talking about rape, sexual assault, and sexual assault between a host and a guest. So these are two people that the company has brought together in the online world who have then met in the offline world, in the real world, and it's resulted in violent crimes occurring. So trying to understand, what is Airbnb's responsibility here? Is it responsible for this? And I think that it asked a really interesting question about Section 230, which is what we see a lot of debate over in the US. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act essentially shields these big tech companies from responsibility over the content that's posted on their platforms. So Craigslist isn't responsible if it's selling a gun to a minor, for example, or Facebook isn't responsible if someone's going to post a really horrific graphic video of a crime. The companies can argue that they don't have liability over the content. All they do is operate a platform that people can use. And so Airbnb had that defence as well, to say through Section 230, all we are is a platform that's connecting two people who want to buy and sell a product, which is a stay in a home. But it became a bit more complicated for Airbnb because you're talking about bringing strangers together under the same roof. And what they need to work as a platform is trust. They need people to trust one another. And if they don't trust one another, you're not going to use the product. So when really awful things happened, there was an incentive to try and keep them quiet, to try and protect the individual and help them if they can, whether that's paying for them to fly home, paying for health and counselling costs, paying for them to go to a hotel, ironically, get out of an Airbnb and go to a hotel because maybe they'll feel safer, but also doing so in the hopes that they're not going to then turn around and bash the company on social media or speak to a publication like Bloomberg about it.
So you've established this kind of home with Airbnb and technology in the respect, and I thought it was really fascinating what you said about Section 230 and its expansion into our real lives, to the extent that that's different from our online lives. Where would you like to go with your career, and do you feel like now that you've managed to break into Businessweek and have that opportunity to do those kind of deep, long, thoroughly reported investigative features, that's you for a while now?
Yeah, I hope so. I think that you're only as good as your last story, right? And I've been in the US for 5 years this coming August, and it took that amount of time to finally get into the job that I was hoping to get when I moved over. And so now that I've got there, I do want to spend some time just, sticking with it and trying to write good stories. Bloomberg is an incredible place to work because of the people who are there. They seem to be able to attract just amazing talent, not only the reporters, but the editors. New Zealand doesn't have a very heavy-handed editing approach, and I don't think I quite understood the value of an editor when I was living and working here to the extent that I now do. And maybe that's a time thing, or maybe it's a culture thing. Journalists here have a lot more, I think, power and autonomy to, get stories into publications that don't maybe get changed or tweaked or morphed as much, or at least that was the case when I was reporting here. But, working for Bloomberg, I've come to understand just how valuable that relationship can be when you really trust an editor and get to work with them very closely. And not only are they trying to ensure that the story is solid and bulletproof. And when you're writing about really sensitive topics where, as you said, maybe these companies don't want this kind of information to come to light, when you know you're going to get pushback, when you know you're going to get defamation lawsuits or you're going to get angry calls when it runs, the editor has to look at the story through that lens, but also to look at it through the lens of how can we make this better? Is this story structured in the best way? Are you opening it with the right person? Could it potentially be better if you kept reporting for the next 2 weeks and found that one person that you need to lock that particular graph in place? You've got quotes in here that aren't as strong as they could be. Could you call that person back and see if they can say something that's a bit cleaner, a bit more concise about this topic? That individual is someone who's quoted all the time in other media outlets. Can you find a different academic, someone who maybe isn't as well known to be the expert in this piece? Or can you, go back to the individual that you talk to and ask again on this particular point? And having an editor who has the bandwidth and the time and the patience and the willingness to sit down with a journalist, it's just been a really cool experience for me. And I know that sounds super nerdy, but I think that when you'd understand this, that, when you write a piece and you've put a lot of effort into it and you've agonized over every sentence and you've really tried to think about the structure and it's your baby and it's like something that you could repeat it or say it in your sleep, like how you know the whole story off by heart pretty much. And then to have an editor just gloss over that, maybe make some typo changes or fix a few grammatical errors or some style related stuff, like you just don't get the satisfaction as what you get when someone's going to be like, no, hold on, I don't think you've got that in the right place, or I think this could be better. And that has just been, the best part of working at Bloomberg for me is working with editors. And I'm going to throw your name out there, Robert, but Robert Friedman is so amazing. He will answer my calls when I'm just frantic and stressed and feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. And he will, he's got magic fingers. He'll touch the copy and it like comes out like gold, Just the turns of phrase that editors use. And I've actually really enjoyed that heavy-handed editing approach, which I didn't think I would, because when I first went in, I felt kind of insulted, like, oh, wow, they thought that they needed to change my intro. Like, I'm not as good as what I thought I was, or how embarrassing. Like, I can't even write a 3-graph story without having editing changes. But now I've come to realize that the value of it. And I think that that's something that the American newsrooms do really well, is lift reporters up and make your copy as strong as it possibly can be before it runs. And that's something that Businessweek magazine is just so damn good at. They give you a voice as a journalist, and they make you write in this conversational way. Every time I talk to one of the Businessweek editors, I ask, like, how do you do that? How do you write in a way that makes readers care and understand? Because business reporting can be so boring sometimes, but yet they have this capacity to just like bring pizzazz into it, but to also make it, not dumb it down, but to make people who live and work in this industry want to read it, and people who don't understand the industry at all also want to read it. And that is just such a knack. That's an art. And I think that they do it exceptionally well. So I'm really grateful that I have the chance to write for a publication like that. And I am very happy that I landed at Bloomberg, and just, often feel very lucky that I get the opportunity to do this.
You can really feel the care and that beautiful tension between really rock solid reporting, but also the flair and that kind of just the fact that they're all just, you can feel that they love it, mm-hmm. and want to make it, as you said, accessible to everyone, but also it's not dumbed down. It's comfortable getting to the weeds, but it will take you there and then bring you out again. And that sort of this, and the sense of humor and the way that the headlines and the imagery and everything is just a masterclass. If you've not read it, it's so worth picking up a copy or subscribing. Olivia, thank you so much for this. As you can tell, this is one I wanted to do for a long time, and your story and what you've told us about your reporting journey. It should be inspirational to any journalist listening. But thanks so much for coming along.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
That was Olivia Carville on The Fold. I want to say a huge thanks to Te Ahe Butler for recording and editing this podcast, to Jane Yee for the superb job she does running the Spin-Off Podcast Network, to Vodafone, our sponsors, to Rachel LaRue, who helped out with prep for this episode, and most of all, as always and ever, to the Spin-Off members. Could not do this without you. If you can be a member and aren't, please consider it. It means so much to us. And if you're not a member but want to help out in some other way, please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. That also is a huge help too. Ka kite. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The Spin-Off's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, like celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.